Amina Malik Hussain, and you're watching The Coffee Table. On November 16th, it was UNESCO's International Day for Tolerance. Now, one could say that, UNESCO days are many, many days, but the thing is that tolerance is something that I've been thinking about, and I looked it up, and I was curious as to what UNESCO thinks tolerance is, and what they had up was something that intrigued me. And what they sort of define tolerance as is a respect and appreciation of cultures, forms of expression, and ways of being human, which I thought was really quite lovely, given that UNESCO. And they also added that tolerance, in their opinion, is a moral duty, but it is also a political and legal requirement, or should be, for individuals, groups, and states. So that basically means that everybody in a society has a kind of social obligation to the other to be tolerant of difference. And I think that that's a problem that we grapple with in Pakistan and across the world. So to sort of, thrash out this philosophical concept with me, we are delighted to welcome Arafat Mazhar on set, who is the director of Sherry Pakistan, of Puffball Studios, and has just released an intriguing and really exciting animated film called Swipe. And joining us over the internet is Gibran Nasser, lawyer and activist. Hello, and welcome to the show, gents.
Hi, thank you for having us.
It's great. I'm really excited about this convo. So, Arafat, your work with Sherry Pakistan has everything to do with fostering a sense of civic responsibility and to sort of, remind people that we're all in it together. And I feel like civics is a really sort of underlooked and underrepresented idea for us. Like, it's not taught in schools. It's a concept that generally, I think, seems to be just alien to us.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of reasons I feel for that. For decades, people who defined what civics is, what rights are, have been pretty much the elite of our community and of our society.
Okay.
So it's always been very Western in the way it has been defined, because we would have these elite, either establishment folks or people who are from a particular class and segment, defining what does it mean to be civilized, and almost looking down upon the masses on, do you really know what tolerance and intolerance is? So if tolerance and intolerance and ideas of these comes from the Constitution, and you have your fundamental rights there and your ideas of citizenship, then why haven't we for decades been able to come up with resources, educational and otherwise, that really has a more indigenous idea of what does it mean to be a citizen, and where do your rights come from? Why should you have tolerance? Because one of the biggest reasons people have difficulty tolerating things is because it's very ambiguous. So when something is very ambiguous, the ability to tolerate it becomes more and more difficult.
Right.
So if everything is A in English, B philosophically grounded in very Catholic philosophy from the West, and has nothing to do with your own tradition, or very little to do with your own tradition, let alone being in your own language, then you can't expect a community that is able to coexist in the way that we would want to. So the way I see it and the way we see it as an institution is, how can we create a local language and an indigenous way to talk about these things without it being a preachy, top-down, hey, I know what it means to be human, you don't. And obviously we have centuries of tradition of what it means to love, what it means to be tender, what it means to be kind, and there's a lot to draw from. So it's beyond UNESCO, just in our culture and South culture, there's a lot that we can teach the Western community as well about tolerance as well.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And the thing that you said about the Constitution. So, Gibran, as a lawyer, what do you think about that? Do you think that the Constitution does it? I'm not familiar with the Constitution as a layperson, but does the Constitution kind of set out general terms of citizenship in that sense?
Well, any state, whether based on any religion or any economic revolution or otherwise, fundamentally demands that its citizens obey the orders of the state. And you will find that throughout history, even in the most benevolent of states and even in one of the most harsh terms of dictators, the core fundamental principle or demand of the state is of its citizens to obey the order of the day, and through that they claim to ensure rule of law. As far as the Constitution is concerned, the Constitution is primarily a contract between the citizen and the state, whereby we are recognizing each other's existence. The Parliament of Pakistan, the judiciary of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, and all of its subordinate institutions, including our army and our law enforcement agencies, have come into force through the constitution. If there is no constitution in Pakistan today, our military would look like a private militia for all intents and purposes. Our judiciary would look like, with due respect, a group of individuals who feel that they have the authority to adjudicate matters of other people, but otherwise they would have none. And similarly, it is through the constitution that who is a citizen is given recognition.
Yes.
And what is the definition of a human in that particular country is also given in the constitution. Because when somebody asks me or anybody asks me what are human rights, I say that that's the only way you can identify that somebody is a human. So the definition of human in China is different than the definition of human in Pakistan. And the definition of human in Pakistan is different from the definition of human in America.
Yes.
Because our rights vary. That is, and when I say rights, those includes our not just our right to life, but how is right to life defined by our laws and by our judiciary. Not just our right to expression, but what are the boundaries of right to expression and the freedom of speech, and how those are defined by our own cultural, socio-political, economic structure.
Yeah.
So our constitution also helps identify the state structure, and then it is identifying the citizen, and then it goes on to lay down the exchange of terms and exchange of obligations between the state and the citizen.
So, from what I understand, is that the social contract is...
Yeah, and you can't expect almost, especially as a post-colonial state. I think whatever contract, quote unquote, we've come up with, social contract, whether the grounding of it is philosophical, historical, legal, the fact that the British came, divided us. The printing press and the British were the worst thing that could have happened to this place when it comes to tolerance and intolerance. Not to romanticize how well we got along together, different communities, but there is enough academic research to show what the white man did everywhere, everywhere, including Pakistan. So when the Ahmadi community propped up, when the Christian missionaries came in, when the Hindu community, the Sikh community, and the Sunni community, the Shia community were there, the British were very careful and very, very conniving in the way they made sure that they could control these groups against each other, divide and conquer. Now, obviously, that does not apologize a whole century of us staying that way.
Yes, because, you know, they haven't been around for a while.
Yes, but the roots are still there.
Yes.
Whatever state structure we have, whatever we have inherited. So let's say the British, you may know about Jallianwala Bagh, the incident where the state came and massacred us. The same kind of state machinery would be deployed against minority groups, against civil groups, the same kind of response mechanism, because we've inherited the power, the monopoly of power from the state from those same folks. And then you have this state constantly dividing us still.
Yeah. So it was, we've inherited those laws or that state that was set up to control and repress to begin with.
And then you add to that, you know, Zia's government, and you add to that a lot of, you know, just even us as whoever we want to identify as progressive community, completely failing our children, consistently failing. We have failed. Like you and I, we sit here with a failed project, and it's okay to acknowledge that we have not been able to inculcate and educate, or maybe even understand ourselves this conflict well enough. How do I relate to most people in this community? If they love and look up to a figure, Ilmuddin in this case, how do I relate to them? How do I humanize them? How do I understand that anxiety that exists in them, that the moment a certain word may be uttered, a certain placard in a march might be uttered, what happens? So it's a lot of failure on our end as well. But having said that, I think there are a lot of opportunities based on the way the new media presents us, the way civil rights activists are a lot more unconventional in the way they approach things, that I hope that we can derive a lot more of this social contract outside of just legal textbooks, and in terms that people can relate to intuitively, not just cognitively, like just right in the gut, something that hits them in the gut, that, okay, that's a human being, and there's a dignity to it. So beyond the legal definition.
That's the thing, like human dignity is something that I want to talk more about, but first, a break. See you in a minute. Hi, Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. We're talking to Arafat Mazhar and Gibran Nasir about tolerance in society, and it's actually a really interesting conversation. So, Gibran, we were talking about divide and conquer and how, let's say, that the sort of pre-colonial state was one that was sort of, control was the main sort of focus of that state. So, as a sort of independent or democratic state now, doesn't it suit a state, or doesn't it suit us as citizens of the state for everybody to sort of be adhering to the social contract that we've been talking about? Like, I think what my question is like who benefits from intolerance?
I did not say that the structure. Yes, I did say that it was an imperial structure, and we call it the British Raj, and we may treat them as foreigners, but it was still a state structure under which our own founding fathers operated. I mean, we should have a clear distinction between the political ideology of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and of Bhagat Singh. Those are poles apart, and as well as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So it is one thing to recognize somebody as a founding father, and it is a completely different thing to recognize somebody as a revolutionary.
Yes.
We should not confuse the two. The two are not synonymous. Now, coming forward to this thing that in a democratic society, now even right now, I believe that there are territories within Pakistan for which we have declared to be in Pakistan vis-a-vis our constitution. Okay. I still feel that there is a room for our constitution to improve and to grow. And I still feel that still all segments of society in Pakistan are not effectively represented, and we still need to be represented. I mean, we are yet to have our first transgender parliamentarian in Pakistan. We are very much far away from that. I mean, we did allot reserve seats for religious minorities and for women to encourage that idea of their public participation, and also to kind of make it easier for people to from different religious backgrounds or from different gender backgrounds to participate. And I feel we should have at least reserve seats for gender minorities as well in that same regard.
And I think it goes back to, Arafat, what you were saying about developing a more indigenous sense of self and a more localized sense of ourselves as a community and as people who coexist in a society, which needs to... But again, isn't it really tricky? Because like Gibran said, sort of rediscovering a sense of who we are as a people now, we are not what we used to be pre-Raj, or when, let's say 200 years ago or 250 years ago. It's not the same situation now.
I mean, there seems to be a global wave of these very hyper-masculine, intolerant leadership.
Yes.
Right? And you have intolerance all over the world. So there is this one very troubling phenomena that seems to have swept the whole world up, barring some countries. In Pakistan's case, I would say a couple of things, right?
Yeah.
So once this colonial quote-unquote hangover is over for us, I think even something like how do we negotiate and how do we talk to those people who tell us what rights are. Now, for example, I would highly encourage everybody to read one of our best academics that she passed away a few years ago, Dr. Saba Mahmood. She was a professor at UC Berkeley, an exceptional scholar of critique on secular studies and critique on human rights.
Yeah.
So even her critique on human rights derived from the fact that a lot of the rights that were written, that we ratified, were eventually, the origins were the needs for the British colonial Christian missionaries to convert Muslims to Christian so that they can create a greater Christian population. Now, what they came up with at the end is a very good substantive idea of religious freedom. But you cannot look at it ahistorically. Where it comes from is a need to dominate, still from a very non-secular space, very non-secular. What does freedom of religion, freedom of expression, tolerance mean for us? And what are those limits? Are there, as a culture, are we a lot more, the word goes tamizdar?
Yeah. Respectful.
Respectful. Like, do we really want to go around offending everyone? Like, is that our, I mean, that could be a French way of, critiquing our art. What is our way of art? Is really offense has that been a center of our humor? If it has been, hasn't it been very tasteful? When you look at the humor in late 80s, early 90s, it was very tasteful, even when it was Tanz, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I think I myself included get very swept up in these Western ideas, which look very good on paper and rightly so. But the moment you look at it a little deeper, you feel like you want to figure this one out yourself. So I don't want to offend you. I want to talk to you. I have no interest in offending you. I want to talk to you. I just want you to hear me out and see that you and I have the same organs, the same beating heart, a love for the community. And you may differ from me. That's okay. That's in fact even good that you have a difference of opinion. A society will always need people who like to conserve things as they are. So my mother is from Jamaat Islami. She was on the Haya March. I was on the Aurat March. We were on the other spectrum of the marches. We came back together and we were able to have a conversation. She didn't change her mind. I didn't change mine. But there was no violence. And by violence, I don't just mean obviously physical act of violence. I mean muting someone, dictating what you can and cannot say. Someone giving you a threatening phone call right after you said something. How could you say that? And that's why it's important for us to both recognize the importance of these international treaties and these ideas of social contract that comes from Western philosophy as well as, but I'll also try and see what does it mean for us today in the present tense and where can we derive more of this storytelling and something that's more human, so less statist and more human.
But also, don't you think that there are some things that are just universally good for communities, like tolerating difference of opinion, sort of not being belligerent about tolerance of difference of opinion, or telling the truth, or trying to help people, or sort of trying to sort of act on a better impulse. So those are things that I surely do translate around the world, like human kindness, or like how you function as a decent human being.
Look, I agree with you. Obviously, no one's going to say no to that. No one's going to say no to that.
But it's good for everybody.
But the problem with that is also no one's going to say no to that is precisely that. Because it is such an ambiguous, abstract idea that you can get away with saying, I believe in those values. How does that translate to your community? How does that translate to the Second Amendment or what I have to sign during the passport when I go there to passport? How does it translate to who I'm okay with getting my children married to and not married to? Those things, and also I do not necessarily agree with them being as universal as we've been made to think.
Interesting.
Because at the end of the day, everybody has been, every institution has been, every community has been interpreting what those limits are.
Yes, quite right. And I think that Gibran also said something about this, before we were recording in other conversations. I always feel so privileged to be like, when you weren't listening, this is what we were talking about. But Gibran, you also said something about how it's difficult to define tolerance because it's difficult to kind of set limits, like who decides what is tolerant and what isn't tolerant. But surely we can agree on some basic level of tolerance, perhaps, that would work?
Say it this way, Arafat mentioned that you don't need to go around offending people, but unfortunately today people are going around taking offense, whether you intend to offend them or not, because our activities are so different that it is becoming more and more difficult to actually converse freely. And I think my freedom of speech or my freedom of expression is compromised when I am under the moral, social and political pressure to censor myself but not be able to freely express without being judged. Look at the NBA, played only in America, and they think of it as a World Cup. Yes, domestic sports is a big fraternity there, but in many ways, it is a society which does not really know anything outside of its own boundaries, and which feels that their worldview is the established worldview everyone else should have, and those who do not share those values need saving. That's where the white man savior complex comes. That I still find it so troubling. Now, speaking to someone who's associated with a news channel, that even to this day, I respect those senior journalists who come to Pakistan and cover stories. But I also keep on asking myself, when are these international outlets are going to have a chief Pakistani journalist doing Pakistani stories? As long as our social commentaries and our political commentaries and our legal commentaries will be written by foreigners, they will continue to be seen from that westernized lens, whereas we are a society and we need some kind of saving, and those things will never be contextualized. So I do not know whether it's deliberate that they do not like to promote local voices and local opinions, and only those local opinions seem to get approval of being published, who are damning of our own society as opposed to understanding on our own society.
Quite
So
right. And if we
I-
don't,
we also- Yeah.
Sorry,
So-
I'm
so-
interrupting. Let's just sort of take back our own narratives, but how can we do that unless we are aware of what a narrative really is? Food for thought. We're going to take a very quick break. See you in a second. Welcome back to the coffee table. Minds are whirring furiously today as we talk to Arafat Mazhar and Gibran Nasser about what it means to exist civilly in a society. But I'm still curious, Arafat. Intolerance is obviously bad, and yet we still have plenty of it. So who is benefiting from fostering these cycles of mistrust? Someone is doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, look around and there is political capital, there is capital, there is money, economy, there's money to be made in intolerance, there's votes to be gathered in intolerance. When you weaponize these things, you politicize this thing, they become an instrument of control. Who are going to use those instruments of control? Corporations are going to use them. Your power structures are going to use them. So everyone, the 1% of the 1%, the elite, and those necessarily, I don't necessarily mean in the capitalist sense of the word. I also mean in the religious sense of the word. The activists who want to all of a sudden religious activists who want to be more relevant, it's very easy. I can come up with a political party name that could be centered on indifference and intolerance and get a lot of votes. I mean, so why does it work so easy? It's such a, I mean, there are multiple, obviously a lot of reasons and with different ways that has happened over the past few decades. It just seems to me that recently all over the world, I think there's just, it has become the go-to way to resolve a very fear-based idea of yourself, identity of yourself. So for example, it has become very threatening for people that a certain idea is going to be imported and implemented on me. And that anxiety then, what you call a limbic hijack, which means that all of a sudden you're not thinking rationally, you're not reflecting, you're reacting. It does become very easy if we are at a point where we need to step back a little, maybe even, and empathize a little bit as well. How do I relate to this person? It's easy for me because my parents are people who do belong to that community of Jamaat Islami. And so it's easy for me to humanize and figure out, oh, how do I relate to my mother? But she's an incredibly kind and compassionate person. What do I do? How do I talk to her? How do I listen to her? And how do I make sure that the way I engage with her with new ideas, or even very traditionally ideas that have been taken away, that does not hijack her limbic system, but just resonates to her emotionally? What kind of stories can we tell? What kind of, more than here, which I've been obsessed with for a while, more than analytical, how can we tell human stories and how can we connect with each other in a way that does not immediately set off alarm bells?
But what about, like, now maybe Gibran, you can jump in here, but what about the alarm bells that are ringing on both sides? Like, there are anxieties on every end. And, you know, Gibran, you mentioned universities and how, you know, so much intolerance gets bred there also, which is actually really counterintuitive if you think of it in that philosophy, in the ideal sense that, you know, that education should help you to think and it should help you to question and help you to kind of develop this sense of your own mind, but you're being indoctrinated, you know, into this sort of narrative that Arafat has mentioned. It's quite troubling.
See, the thing is that insecurities are going to remain there. People are going to remain anxious. People are going to feel that what they know is right, and people will remain to be afraid of what they not know. The fear of the unknown is going to be there. That's a very natural. People are not scared. I don't think that people are actually afraid of debating ideas or of heated debates. People are really afraid of the fact that who has a monopoly of violence or whatever other intimidation to actually stop me from enjoying my rights and my freedoms as enshrined under the Constitution as per law. Going on forward, it's also become unfortunate that because what we feel that, at least I feel Pakistan, as was this region was in the case of the British Raj, still is, that we somehow are the lab rat for clash of civilizations. We have our own inherent values and intrinsic frame of mind about certain things. And then we have imported a lot of values from abroad. And because of the global age of internet and social media, the transportation of new thoughts and new ideas is far more. But what is missing at the end of the day is saying it's fine if other people think differently.
Yeah.
Everything comes with the notion that either you agree with me or I'll, as per the cancel culture, block you.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was to Arafat and I was smirking because when Arafat said, what should I do? I said, post the hashtag cancel mom. Because what else would you do? That's the advice you'll find from millennials these days, unfortunately. So it is that much more important to actually have these conversations, and conversations are not only to take place to convince the other person that you are right. Conversations is important. Understand the other person, that why do they think what they think and where they are coming from.
I think that's really important.
Develop empathy. Conversations are there to develop that empathy. Conversations are not there to actually prove yourself right or prove your worth or the merit of your argument.
Yes.
And as long as we do not agree or recognize the fact that some things may be more sacred to a person and some things may not be as sacred to you. Something may be more holy for another person and some things may not be as holy for you. Some people to this day say that, my marriage is my concern, whoever I wish to marry. And some people are still of the view that very willingly they will say that without my parents' consent, I won't marry anyone.
Yes.
So not everything is to be, dubbed as pressure or a regressive approach. Everybody has their own set of values which to enjoy and live. And like I said, if you actually transport these ideas of what is hate speech and what is right and what is wrong in that sense, and you take it back to the formation of our own religion, you would not be able to justify many actions. You would feel that maybe the people who are not following the religion of Islam, they were being subjected to hate speech. One could come up with that argument if they want to.
Yes.
The way how they've been pressed. So things don't work. So that's the thing. We are transporting foreign values and completely taking out the local, political, social, religious, economic context of things.
Right. And speaking of reaching out to people in terms that they understand, and I feel like this is where Puffball Studios and the work that you do with Chehri is so valuable and I think so effective, because on the one hand with Chehri you have the smaller clips and the smaller videos which are explaining, sort of civic duty and don't steal electricity, or what does it mean, what does your marriage contract mean, and sort of those more kind of day-to-day life living handy things to know. But then you have the work that Puffball is doing, and you guys have recently made a really wonderful and really thought-provoking film called Swipe, and I feel like it really is, for me at least, one of the main things that I took away from it was this sense of tolerance or a lack of it, and how it's so easy to sort of as a community get swept away by this common kind of hungriness for control.
Yeah, I mean, I'll build on what Gibran said on this one thing, right? These very exclusive elite circles and echo chambers in which we're happy to give each other a pat on the back for. One of the things that I think I'm proudest about this film, fact that we funded it ourselves, made it, like put in a year and a half to make it.
Yeah.
It's a hand-drawn film. There's a lot of craft to it.
It's in Urdu.
It's Urdu, it's local. But the most important thing is, we were asked by festivals upon festivals to send that film to them. So the white man basically, here's what happens. You see all these documentaries and all these films, you hear about them, they go to a festival circuit abroad, and for a year and a half, your own people don't see it. So the first thing we want to do is decolonize the very idea of storytelling. So if I want to talk, if the story is about me, about our people, by our people, then the first people who should be watching is our people. So what we did was put it up on YouTube for free. That's usually unheard of. You don't put films out for free. And we put that out for free because if you are a festival or if you who wants to keep this exclusive to yourself, then sadly you're not doing a very good job in conversation, and we have nothing to do with you.
And what's the response sort of been like to Swipe, let's say? Because it's basically a film, and without wanting to give too much of it away, it's a film about judgment really, and how people kind of get swept up in this sort of mass participation in this kind of judgment and this, this sort of sense of I'm right and you are wrong, and how it then ultimately, and of course, something disastrous was going to happen because you don't exist in limbo. You don't exist, you're not an island, right? You're connected to everybody around you, and the violence that you mete out eventually will circle back to you.
Yeah.
So what's the response of the film been like so far?
I mean, it has been beyond expectations. So the past 10 years, I've done a lot of things related to the subjects. Never been like this.
Yes.
I mean, as you said, it talks about the gamification of judgment.
Yeah.
It becomes a game, and everybody's playing that game without understanding the consequences of it. And I felt like it might have been a little divisive, but because it's an emotional film, it's storytelling at its core, I also feel like because we use Ahmed Faraz's poem, and if I may, in his words, तुम अपने अकीदों के नेज़े हर दिल में उतारे जाते हो, हम लोग मोहब्बत वाले हैं, तुम खंजर क्यों लहराते हो? You use these swords of your faith on every heart, and if you're people of love, please put them down.
Yeah.
And there are 700 comments, let's say, in the past 5 days. Not a single one has been a troll. His single one has been hate. It's been about either people crying or people grieving together. There isn't a recognition, at least, through that storytelling, I feel, that, okay, we might have an issue here. We are failing our children. And I, for example, want to relate. I look at Mumtaz Qadri's son, and my heart breaks. I want to talk to him, but I can't. He's too distant. And I feel like I have already failed him. I look at children all across the community with which I have never been able to establish a relationship. And the film is essentially about how we're failing our children by giving them almost a game of intolerance that is society, because you get currency, you get political votes, you get money, and it's become a game, and you've desensitized to it. So the response has been overwhelmingly positive. It's just that if you want to watch this film, you can go to swipethefilm.com. It's for free.
Yeah.
It's a 15-minute film. And what we're hoping to achieve through that is see how do people respond to things that are less preachy and saying the same thing through storytelling.
Yeah, and like Gibran said, to kind of start a conversation, because you can't have tolerance or foster even a sense of it without trying to reach out to the other person, and vice versa. Because I feel like this shouldn't only be sort of top down, but also a bottom up some kind of reciprocal kind of curiosity. I don't know if it exists, but I'm hoping that there is a space.
I think, which is why so much of our focus and so much of my focus lately has become less statist, less legal, and more how do we tell stories in all kinds of ways. Ranging from a small WhatsApp message, which is a form of storytelling now, to like films and books and literature and history, so that maybe we can find common grounds of humanity. And nothing does that. Maybe a law might not do that very well. A codified law in a language alien to you might not do that.
Especially a distant law.
A distant law might not do that.
Yeah.
But maybe when you see your own city of Multan, which is that this film is based on, lose its spirituality, that your spiritual ancestors have left Multan. In a way, that's the premise of that film. How does that make you feel? Isn't that at the heart of every intimate conflict? You go to a therapist and they ask you, how does that make you feel? And do you want to be right, or do you want to connect? So I want to connect.
That's really the choice of it at the end of the day. Like, do you want to be right, or do you want to connect? And I think that's a really beautiful way to end the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Gibran, for joining us in this really, really wonderful and complex and illuminating conversation that I hope that you have enjoyed as much as I have. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Coffee Table.